Hello everyone, and welcome to a quick tutorial on the treble stitch for crochet, also known as the double if you're working in US stitch terms. This stitch is used extensively for the creation of patterns and textures whenever you're creating material for blankets or granny squares or any projects like that, and it's certainly one that you'll want to have in your arsenal for your projects in the future. So what do we need to do to get started? And as always, the first thing we're going to have to do is attach our yarn to the hook. To do that, we're going to create a slip knot by putting a little loop in our yarn like so, passing the tail through, and then pulling it tight, and then you can insert your hook into the little hoop that you've created. And then you can use the tail on the other end just to gently tighten that knot onto the hook so that it's not going to go anywhere, but it's not going to come flying off the end neither. And the next thing we're going to need to do is create our foundation chains. For these, you can do as many chains as you like. For the little swatch that I'm creating, I'm going to do about 20 of them. And we create our foundation chains by grabbing hold of the yarn and pulling it through that hoop that's already on the shaft. And just keep going like that until you've got as many as you need. As I say, I'm going to do about 20. And there we go, there is my foundation of 20 little chain stitches, and now we can start creating the trebles themselves. And the first thing you're going to do is you're actually going to create 3 more chains on the end of your foundation chains, and these are known as turning chains. And these are essentially exactly the same stitch, but what they're going to allow us to do is go back in the opposite direction when we're already at the correct height for the stitch that we're creating. If that all sounds a bit confusing, just give it a second and it'll all make sense. So we've got our 3 turning chains, 1, 2, 3, that you can see just there. And so we're going to work our first treble stitch into this stitch just here. It is the 4th one back down the row. So that was the last of the foundation chains that we created. So remembering that you're going to be working into this 4th stitch back down along our row of chains, you're going to wrap your yarn around the hook like so. Then you're going to insert the hook into that stitch. Then you're going to grab hold of the yarn, pull it through that first loop only, so that you now have 3 hoops on the shaft of the hook. Grab your yarn again, pull through 2 of those hoops, then grab the yarn again and pull through the remaining 2 hoops so that you're left with just 1 hoop on the shaft of the hook. And you can see we've created really quite a tall stitch just there. And that is how you create the treble stitch. So to show that one again, we're going to be wrapping the yarn around the shaft of our hook. We're going to go into the next stitch along, so ignore that big gap that's just there. That can look very tempting. That is the stitch that we've actually just created. We need to go into that little stitch next to it. So we're going to insert our hook, grab hold of the yarn and pull through, like so. Grab hold of the yarn, pull through 2 of the hoops which are on the shaft, and grab hold of it again and pull through the remaining 2 hoops. So you're left with just 1 hoop on the shaft. And again. Wrap that yarn around the hook, then we're going to go into the next stitch, grab hold of the yarn, pull through, so we should have 3 hoops on the shaft now, grab the yarn, pull through 2 hoops, grab it again and pull through those remaining 2 hoops, just like so. So I'm going to be creating those little trebles in every single one of these stitches along my foundation chain now. Just doing exactly the same as before, wrapping the yarn around my hook, inserting into the next stitch, grabbing and pulling through, grabbing the yarn, pull through 2 hoops, grab again, pull through 2 hoops. I'm just going to keep repeating that until I get to the end of the row. And there we go, you can see there I've made my little trebles going into each of the stitches, and it's created this rather laddery looking pattern, with each of the stitches being quite tall and then having these chains up at the top. But as you can see, I have got 1 little stitch left on this row just there. You can see the little knot on the end. That is a slip knot that we created right at the very beginning. You can completely ignore that now. It doesn't need to be worked into at all. This is going to be the final stitch. And then I need to head back in the opposite direction. And so we're going to work our last stitch exactly the same as we've been doing by wrapping our yarn, inserting into that final little stitch there, grabbing hold, pulling through to create 3 of our loops, grab and pull through 2, grab and pull through 2, creating exactly the same little treble on the end, so that we are left with 1 little hoop on the shaft. And then we are going to add 3 turning chains again, exactly the same as we did at the beginning. So we're going to add 3 little chain stitches, 1, 2, and 3. Then you can turn your work over. So literally just flip it right over. And now we can work back in the opposite direction. And so if we look a little bit more closely, you can see that we've got these 3 turning chains here, and that's going to be our first stitch. That's what we're going to be working into as we make our way back in the opposite direction. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be wrapping the yarn around our hook, and then we're going to insert the hook into that first stitch. And if we have a look at our work from the top, you can see that I've inserted the hook through both of the top loops of that stitch. If you look at the little work as it goes down, those are the little chains that we've created along the top of our crochet, and we're going through both of those top loops. So from there, grab the yarn and pull through, creating the 3 loops on our shaft as usual. Grab and pull through 2, grab and pull through 2. Okay, so this is going to be the next stitch that we need to work into, and we know that we need to go underneath both of the hoops that are on the top. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap our yarn around our hook. We're going to insert the hook into the next stitch, making sure to go underneath both of the hoops. Grab the yarn and pull through, grab and pull through 2, grab and pull through 2. And we're going to be continuing that all the way along our work until we get to the other end. And there we go. So I've now reached the end of that row, and you can see things are a little bit different here, because this last little group of stitches that we've got is actually the turning chain, and so I don't have that nice little double that I can work into along the top. What I do have though is the last loop of the turning chain itself. And so what I can do is I can wrap my yarn exactly the same as before, and instead I'm going to work into that little top loop just there. I can then work a normal treble stitch exactly the same as I would usually, like so. Then exactly the same as before, work my 3 little turning chains, flip the work over. Now you can see on this one, now that we've done a couple of rows, we've got our full number of stitches and we've also got the turning chains on either end. If I hold this turning chain upright like so, you can see that it is actually forming a stitch. So what we've got is we've got our 20 little trebles, and then on either end we have got one of our turning chains, which do count as stitches. So if you want to keep your edges nice and straight, what you're going to need to do is account for those stitches as well. And so what we're going to do is we're going to wrap our yarn exactly the same as we would do before, and we're actually going to skip this very first stitch from now on, because that is technically the stitch that the turning chain belongs to. And so instead we're going to work into this one. Up until this point it didn't really matter because we didn't have turning chains on either end, but now that we're going from row 3 upwards, we just need to account for those ones. And so we can once again though work our way down the row, now that we've done those, putting our little trebles into every stitch. And so from row 3 onwards, you just need to remember that that turning chain now counts as one of your trebles. So I'm just coming to the end of this little row once again, and then we're going to need to go back in the opposite direction. And remembering that because I have run out of the little doubles to work into, I'm going to work into this turning chain by going into that top loop. Like so. And then working a little treble in there. Then once again, add my little 3 turning chains up at the top. Turn my work over, and because we're past row 3 now, this is in fact row 5, my turning chain is going to count as a stitch so that we can keep this edge nice and straight. So I'm going to skip that first stitch and go into that one, because this first stitch now belongs to the turning chain. Now this can seem a little bit confusing when you're not used to working with turning chains and seeing them as the stitches, but if as you're doing your work, if you're finding that you're not getting a nice straight edge on it and that it's going a little bit wider or it's getting a little bit narrower, then you can guarantee it's because you're not seeing those turning chains as a stitch. And so you're gradually increasing the number of stitches that you have with each row. Okay, so I'm now coming to the end of row 4. And I think I'm going to change colour. So once again, I've got a little turning chain that I need to work into. I'm going to wrap my yarn around the hook, insert into that top loop, grab the yarn, pull through, so I've got 3 hoops on the shaft, grab and pull through 2, and then this time I am going to stop once I have 2 little hoops on that shaft, and we're going to bring in the other colour. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay my new colour over the hook like so, and I'm going to pull that one instead through those 2 hoops, just like so. Then I can find its working tail, pull that tight, and then I'm going to use this new colour now to create the turning chains. 1, 2 and 3. Now I can turn my work. I'm remembering that because we are past row 3, this little turning chain counts as the first stitch, so ignore that little stitch there for going into. We are going to wrap our yarn with the new colour, go into the next stitch along, going through underneath the 2 hoops, grab yarn, pull through, grab and pull through 2 hoops, grab and pull through 2 hoops, and now we are just going to work back in the opposite direction using the grey instead. And once you've done a few stitches of your new colour, you can cut the tail of the old colour. So remember to leave a good sort of 3 or 4 inches so that you've got space to be tying it in. What you can do though is you can just snip that one off, and that way it's not going to be in the way. So I've done 4 more rows in the grey on my rather curiously shaped little swatch, and so I've just come to the very final stitch, and I'm going to finish this one off by pulling the yarn through the last 2 hoops on the last stitch, so that I've got 1 hoop on my shaft. Then I'm going to pull it through to create 1 little chain on the end. But instead of doing a turning chain now, I'm just going to cut the tail. Snip that one, and then we can pull the yarn all the way through and then tighten a little knot on the end, just so that everything's now held nice and firmly in place. And you can see that these treble stitches create a really nice open weave sort of style of material. It creates this very classic sort of holey appearance, which makes it really quite a light and airy material, ideal for summer clothing or even for lighter blankets. So you can see on this little swatch here, where I've changed colour every row, that the stitches have a nice depth to them, and because of that the fabric grows really quickly. It does mean you have this sort of, as I say, looser, sort of more airy feel to it, thanks to the holes, but at least your project grows in size nice and quickly. But I hope you've enjoyed this little tutorial on creating the treble stitch for crochet. Happy crafting everybody, and I will see you again soon.